And you've moved us right into, you've really started off our third set of speakers tonight, a set of cultural organizers who will share the necessity of using cultural expression to assert our values, as you just did in that song and video, to assert our vision of society and reclaim the fullness of our humanity. This was a really important intervention that came up in our research, whether as visual art, song, storytelling, or ritual, or other cultural expressions. This form of organizing was really powerful through moments of crisis when community can be fractured and isolated. Using culture to build leadership, to build community, and to build power emerge as a really important tactic, especially among those who don't necessarily see themselves as part of any single political community quite yet. So following Reverend Chris, we will hear from Josh Yoder, an organizer from South Central Pennsylvania, who's worked on pipeline fights, housing justice, rural voting rights, and more. He's also the co-lead of Look Loud, a team of visual strategists who support communities to take control over their own narratives and bring new communities into social justice organizing. We'll also hear from Minister Sierra Taylor, cultural organizer, strategist with the Kairos Center and the Freedom Church of the Poor, who's also a co-founder of the Dream Defenders. Thank you both.
Am I starting? Great. Nice to meet you all. I'm Josh. I'm calling in from Philadelphia. Some of y'all might know my collaborator, Rachel Shregas, who's off tonight because their partner is having surgery. I'm going to talk through two different examples of cultural organizing that came up in talking to Kairos around this. The one that I think is pretty natural for people, there was a lot of organizing around Gaza this summer, and I did a lot of organizing around faith groups with Gaza. And one way to think of cultural organizing is there were a lot of people who were watching things happen, thinking, I have opinions, but I don't really belong out in the street here. Like people like me, we're not doing this organizing. We had a number of Muslim kids who were trying to organize their imams out into the street, and the imams took a look at the cardboard signs that people were doing and were like, we spent 30 years assimilating here and keeping our heads to like, no, we're not doing this. But when the actions change to be we're doing leading prayers in the street, or we're changing the banners so it's something that you see and reflect your way of moving in the culture, suddenly it expands the scope of who thinks they belong in the street, right? We did a lot of organizing with Christians who were like, I have these real ethical dilemmas, but I don't see myself as having a lot of political opinions, and so I don't belong out here. And changing the actions to really the language and the aesthetics to really mirror that gave people a place to be like, oh, my voice is relevant here. But even more importantly, when you change the meeting to a potluck, suddenly people say, oh, I do have the skills on this. I know how to do that. When you change the sit-in to a prayer service, suddenly people are like, oh, I know how to run a prayer service. I can lead in this. I can get on the microphone. My voice makes sense in this context, right? That's a lot of cultural organizing, is finding the groups of people who don't feel like the action is for them and changing the action to expand that tent. But there's a second way. There's a yes and to that we really talked about, which was when the pandemic started, and I think this is relevant for a lot of authoritarianism. It made something that was already true much more true, and that is that our organizing is much bigger than the people who are physically showing up to things. A lot of people think about culture as something that kind of privately happens in a room between the people who are physically there, but the rally is always much bigger. The people we need to win are much bigger than the people who show up to the rally. They're out there, they're stuck at home, they're stuck at work, they're taking care of someone, they're watching us on a phone, and they're feeling isolated and alone and wondering whether this is for them. And cultural organizing is about reaching through that screen and saying, yes, we see you. You are not going to be able to be isolated out here. Like, we are bringing you into this. And that was very true in the pandemic, because suddenly all the people who we thought of as core organizers because they would show up to things in person, suddenly they're all stuck outside at home. And so things like signs in the windows became really relevant. Things like sidewalk chalk out there became relevant, or dropping banners off bridges. An anecdote that I draw a lot of hope from is I came out of the street art background. And historically, in most countries, when there's an authoritarian moment, when people declare curfews, there's a golden age of street art, right? Because suddenly people take all those stories and they put it on the walls, and those walls really start speaking to people's experience of the thing, right? I think one of the things that's really important not to underestimate with cultural organizing is I was taught that the core organizers are the people who show up physically, right? And when we take time to think about social media, when we take time to think about photos, when we take time to think about sharing with the bigger world, we're taking time away from our core people. But the truth is that, especially in these moments, our core people are never just the people who show up, and culture never fits inside that room. And so taking the space to put that out there in the world so that people can see and respond to it, that's a real core to where culture blossoms. That's it.
Thank you so much for that, Josh. I've just really appreciated Look Loud's work. And so glad that we can do this together. And the work that you did on the report itself, like the imagery. And thank you to everyone who's joined tonight. I was texting Shally, I'm like all weepy. I feel like this year has just been shit. And then we were on this call and we're hearing all this goodness and these good stories and just really appreciating that. Damn, okay. So music and ritual. Music and ritual hold a very unique and transformative power in our community, much like the power of visual art that Josh was sharing. And they're just not expressions of culture or, you know, the decorations that we put on top of our organizing work or our actions, but they're actually acts of themselves, of reclamation, of resistance, of leadership development, community development, and survival, as we've been talking about tonight. They remind us that our stories, our voices, our breath, and our heartbeats are interconnected, shaping the fabric of who we are and who we want to become. My dear friend, colleague, comrade, and sister in the struggle, Sharon Rebar often talks about when we sing together, and this is scientifically proven, our breathing aligns and our heartbeats find each other in rhythm. We create a collective pulse that embodies the strength of our movement. Because song is more than just melody, it's an invitation into the movement, as Josh was saying, a call to action in its own right. It gives voice to our politics and embodies our soul, embodies the soul of our community, helping to define and shape not only who we are, but who we aspire to be. And ritual too plays a profound role. Often we think about ritual as something old or rigid or exclusive. And a couple years ago, the culture team at Kairos began to explore the role of ritual in our network. And we found that ritual is an important part of our culture and our communities. And they grow out of familiar practices that mark important moments in our lives and also how we assign meaning and value to our community. And so we define ritual as Kairos, as Freedom Church of the Poor, as a purposeful and symbolic practices that emerges from, evokes, and nurtures profound layers of feeling and thought. It is grounded in our lived experience, our stories, our needs, our authority, our desires. As such, ritual embodies the values and intentions of our community and serves to deepen and repair relationships to one another and the world around us. Ritual is an intentional practice that affirms and expresses our values, identities, and sense of belonging. It is a way of claiming the power, beauty, and love that we know we need in our world right now. Ritual allows us to imagine and embody the vision of a world that is shaped in the image of our people, tailored to supporting our needs, uplifting our values, and providing a future in which we all can thrive. Not simply in defense of and against the harmful policies and practices of the rulers of today, but in affirmation of the world we know is possible, the world that we're striving for. Grandma, amid so much being torn down and degraded, we must reclaim our art, music, ritual, and stories, not only as cultural projects, but as political projects and projects of survival. These practices ensure that we, in our vision of society, are not erased. Through ritual, we hold space for our grief and despair, but we also transform it, acknowledging the realness while calling ourselves towards something different. And so, as much as we are in the struggle and fighting back and being on defense, ritual allows us to do more than just resist. It brings forth a vision, an affirmation of a world rooted in justice and love. Music and ritual remind us that we are not alone, that we are connected, and that we are powerful when we move and breathe as one. So let's continue to sing, to gather, to create and reclaim, because our survival depends not just on resisting, but building a world worthy of our dreams.